It was a freezing January morning in the small town of Willowbrook, the kind of day where the wind cuts through even the thickest coats, and icy sidewalks make every step uncertain. Mr. Daniel Carter had arrived at Riverside Elementary before sunrise, just as he always did, his breath visible in the bitter air. He loved his routine, the quiet hum of the empty hallways before the students arrived, the satisfaction of preparing his classroom for the day ahead. Teaching wasn't just a job for him, it was a calling. As he stacked a few books on his desk, he glanced out the window and noticed a small figure trudging along the snow-covered sidewalk. His heart sank. It was Jamie, one of his third-grade students, and even from this distance, he could see the boy's bare feet pressing into the ice-covered pavement. His thin, worn-out socks were soaked from the slushy snow, his tiny frame shivering against the relentless wind. Mr. Carter's stomach twisted with a familiar ache. He had known that many of his students came from struggling families, but to see Jamie in this condition? It was unbearable. He rushed to the door, stepping outside just as Jamie reached the school's entrance, his face flushed red from the cold. "Jamie." Mr. Carter knelt down, his voice gentle. "Where are your shoes, buddy?" Jamie hesitated, looking away as if ashamed. I outgrew them," he murmured, his breath fogging up the air between them. "Mama said we gotta wait till next month. She's trying to save up." A lump formed in Mr. Carter's throat. He knew Jamie's mother, hard-working, kind, but struggling to make ends meet. The town wasn't an easy place to live if you were barely scraping by. There weren't many job opportunities, and the bitter winters only made things harder. Mr. Carter placed a warm hand on Jamie's shoulder. "Come on inside, let's warm you up." As the day went on, he found himself unable to shake the image of Jamie's frozen feet. His lesson plans blurred in his mind, replaced by thoughts of how many other kids might be in the same situation. How many of them were sitting in his class, silently suffering, too proud to ask for help. By the time the last bell rang, he had already made up his mind. He didn't have much money himself, teachers' salaries in Willowbrook weren't exactly generous, but if he could afford his morning coffee, he could afford to buy one pair of shoes. That evening, he stopped by the small department store on Main Street. The shelves were lined with discounted winter boots, some of them still too expensive, but he found a sturdy pair that looked just right. He ran his fingers over the thick soles, imagining Jamie finally walking to school without pain. As he turned toward the checkout counter, he hesitated. Jamie wasn't the only one. He thought of Emma, who always wore shoes 2 sizes too big, stuffing them with tissues so they wouldn't fall off. Kevin, whose soles were so thin he might as well be walking barefoot. Maria, who came to school in flimsy sneakers even during snowstorms. His heart pounded. He couldn't just help one child. Not when so many needed it. Swallowing hard, he pulled out his wallet and counted his cash. If he skipped lunches for the next 2 weeks, if he walked to school instead of driving, he could afford 4 pairs. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. That night, he wrapped the shoes in simple brown paper, labeling them carefully for each student. He felt lighter than he had in weeks. The next morning, he arrived early, placing the packages in each of their cubbies before class started. He didn't want them to feel embarrassed or singled out. This wasn't charity, it was just a small act of kindness, something he wished the world had more of. When the students arrived, the reactions were immediate. A small gasp from Emma, her eyes wide as she pulled out the boots. Kevin touching the thick soles of his new sneakers like they were made of gold. Jamie, holding his new shoes in his hands, looking up at Mr. Carter with tears brimming in his eyes. "You okay, Jamie?" Mr. Carter asked, crouching beside him. The boy swallowed hard, nodding. "I never had new shoes before." Mr. Carter felt his own throat tighten, but he forced a smile. "Well, now you do." The room buzzed with quiet excitement, students whispering, smiling, trying on their new shoes. Mr. Carter had never seen them so happy. But then, the door swung open. Standing in the doorway was Mrs. Halverson, the school principal. Her face was unreadable, her eyes scanning the classroom. "Mr. Carter." "My office." "Now." A chill ran down his spine. Something was wrong. As he walked to her office, he replayed everything in his mind. What had he done wrong? He had used his own money. He hadn't made a scene. Inside her office, Mrs. Halverson sat with her hands clasped on the desk, her face unreadable. Beside her sat Mr. Dobson, the school district administrator. "Mr. Carter," Mrs. Halverson began, her voice clipped and cold. "We've received a report that you've been distributing personal gifts to students." Mr. Carter blinked. Yes, I bought them some shoes." This is a serious violation of school policy," Mr. Dobson cut in. "We have clear rules in place about staff providing personal aid to students. It creates liabilities for the school, and more importantly, it creates favoritism." "Favoritism?" Mr. Carter's voice rose. "These kids were walking barefoot in the snow. I wasn't playing favorites, I was making sure they could get to school without frostbite." "That's not the point," Mrs. Halverson said, her lips pressing into a thin line. "You should have directed them to social services. You can't take these matters into your own hands." Mr. Carter clenched his fists. He knew how social services worked: slow, underfunded, bureaucratic. Those kids needed help now, not months from now. "I don't regret what I did," he said firmly. There was silence. Then, Mrs. Halverson sighed. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter, but effective immediately, you are placed on unpaid leave pending a review." He felt like the floor had been ripped out from under him. "Unpaid leave? For helping children?" "I suggest you clean out your desk," Mr. Dobson added, his tone final. "This isn't up for debate." Stunned, Mr. Carter walked out of the office, his ears ringing. By the time he reached his classroom, the students were already whispering. "Mr. Carter?" Jamie's voice was small. He forced a smile. "It's okay, Jamie. Just take care of those shoes, all right?" Jamie's eyes filled with tears. And for the first time in his life, Mr. Carter felt truly powerless. The news spread through Riverside Elementary like wildfire. By the time the final bell rang, nearly every teacher and student had heard whispers of Mr. Carter's sudden suspension. Parents began showing up early to pick up their kids, each one murmuring in hushed voices, glancing toward his classroom as if it were the scene of a crime. He could feel their eyes on him, the weight of their unspoken questions hanging in the air. As he sat at his desk, slowly gathering his things, his mind raced. How had things come to this? A simple act of kindness, buying shoes for students in desperate need, had cost him his job. He had spent years pouring his heart into this school, into these kids. And now it was all gone. The classroom door creaked open, and he looked up to see Ms. Reynolds, one of the other third-grade teachers, standing hesitantly in the doorway. "Daniel," she said softly, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. Her voice was gentle, but the sadness in her eyes was unmistakable. "Is it true? They're really suspending you for this?" He exhaled heavily, rubbing his temples. "Looks that way." She sat down across from him, shaking her head in disbelief. "This is insane. You were just trying to help." "I know," he said, a bitter chuckle escaping his lips. "Apparently, helping kids is against the rules." Ms. Reynolds folded her arms, her expression darkening. "It's not right. The parents are already talking. They're furious. I heard Mrs. Castillo, Jamie's mom, was calling the school board as soon as she found out." Hearing that made something inside him stir. He hadn't done this for recognition. He hadn't expected gratitude. But knowing that the community cared? That gave him hope. Just then, the door burst open, and Jamie ran in, his brand new shoes scuffing against the tile floor. "Mr. Carter. You're not leaving, are you?" Before he could answer, Mrs. Castillo appeared behind her son, her face flushed with anger. "Mr. Carter, I just heard what they did. This is unbelievable." She turned to Ms. Reynolds. "They're punishing him for helping my child? For helping so many of these kids?" Ms. Reynolds nodded solemnly. "That's exactly what's happening." Mrs. Castillo's hands clenched into fists. "Oh, no. No, no, no. I'm not letting this slide." She turned on her heel and stormed out, her voice already rising in the hallway as she called other parents. "We need to talk. Now." Mr. Carter sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't want to start a riot." Ms. Reynolds gave him a small smile. "Well, you did. And honestly? Good. Maybe it's time people start speaking up." Within an hour, parents began arriving at the school in droves, their voices growing louder as they demanded a meeting with the administration. The commotion grew so intense that Mrs. Halverson, the principal, had no choice but to step outside her office and address them. "Everyone, please," she called out, raising her hands for silence. "I understand your frustrations, but school policies exist for a reason." Mrs. Castillo stepped forward, her voice trembling with anger. "Your policy just punished a man for making sure my son didn't freeze his feet off in the middle of winter. How does that make sense?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Another parent, Mr. Thompson, shook his head. "This school has always had budget issues. You all never step in when our kids don't have what they need. But when a teacher actually does something about it, you punish him?" Mrs. Halverson's face turned red. "It's not that simple," she argued. "There are liability issues, financial concerns." "Bull," Mrs. Castillo shot back. "This is about control. You don't like that he took action without asking your permission." The crowd's anger swelled, voices overlapping, frustration boiling over. Parents were fed up. They weren't just angry about Mr. Carter, they were angry about all of it. The school's lack of funding. The way students were left behind. The way teachers were undervalued. Through the crowd, Jamie clung to his mother's hand, looking up at Mr. Carter with wide, desperate eyes. "You're still my teacher, right?" His heart clenched. He wanted so badly to tell the boy yes. That everything would go back to normal. But he didn't know the answer anymore. At that moment, a voice rang out from the back of the crowd. "Mr. Carter." Everyone turned as a tall man in an expensive black coat stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. He wasn't from around here, his tailored suit, his polished shoes, the way people instinctively moved aside as he walked, everything about him screamed power. Mr. Carter squinted, confused. Yes?" The man extended a hand. "My name is Ethan Sinclair. I believe we need to talk." Silence fell over the hallway. The name Ethan Sinclair wasn't just familiar, it was legendary. He was a billionaire, a tech entrepreneur who had built an empire from nothing. His foundation had donated millions to educational programs across the country. But what was he doing here? Mrs. Halverson looked just as stunned. "Mr. Sinclair, I didn't realize," he ignored her, keeping his gaze locked on Mr. Carter. "I saw your story online," he said, his voice steady. "Someone posted about what happened, and let's just say, it caught my attention." Mr. Carter blinked. His story had gone viral? Sinclair continued, "I grew up in a poor neighborhood, you know. My mom worked 2 jobs to put food on the table. I had teachers who went out of their way to help me when no one else did. If it weren't for them, I wouldn't be where I am today. He took a deep breath. So when I heard about you, I knew I had to step in. Everyone stood frozen, barely daring to breathe. Sinclair reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a business card, and handed it to Mr. Carter. I'm offering you a job, he said simply. Come work for me. The room erupted in whispers. A job? Mr. Carter echoed, his voice hoarse. Sinclair nodded. I run an education initiative. We fund programs for underserved kids. We need people like you, teachers who actually care. I don't want you to just be a teacher. I want you to lead a movement. Mr. Carter was stunned into silence. This was unbelievable. But before he could respond, Mrs. Halverson finally found her voice. Mr. Sinclair, with all due respect, Mr. Carter has a contract with us. We can't simply. Sinclair's eyes flicked to her, and his smile was cold. That's adorable, he said flatly. I'll be donating $10 million to this school district, but only if Mr. Carter is reinstated. Immediately. Gasps filled the air. $10 million? Mrs. Halverson paled. $10 million? You heard me. Sinclair turned back to Mr. Carter. It's your call. Take the job with me, or go back to your classroom. Either way, you're not walking out of here unemployed. Mr. Carter's heart pounded. The choice in front of him was life-changing. And for the first time all day, he felt something he hadn't in hours. Hope. The world around Mr. Carter seemed to blur as he stared at the sleek business card in his hand. Ethan Sinclair's name was embossed in gold, the letters crisp and perfect, like something from a life completely separate from his own. The weight of the moment settled heavily on his chest. A billionaire had just given him a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. A chance to walk away from the school that had turned its back on him. A chance to do something bigger, to make an impact beyond the four walls of a classroom. Yet, as he looked up, his eyes landed on Jamie, the boy whose bare feet on frozen pavement had set everything in motion. Jamie clutched his mother's hand, his gaze wide and searching, desperate for reassurance. Will you still be my teacher? The words echoed in Mr. Carter's mind, twisting something deep inside him. The hallway was silent now, everyone waiting for his answer. The parents, the teachers, the students, Mrs. Halverson, the school board members who had so easily cast him aside. Even Ethan Sinclair, standing there with his arms crossed, waiting patiently. Mr. Carter cleared his throat, feeling his voice catch. I don't know what to say. Sinclair smiled slightly, as if he had already expected that response. It's a lot to take in. You don't have to decide right now. But wasn't that the thing? He had to decide. Right now. This wasn't just about a job offer. It was about his entire future. He had never imagined leaving Riverside Elementary, never imagined walking away from the students who needed him most. But what if this was his chance to do something even greater? What if accepting Sinclair's offer meant helping thousands of kids instead of just a handful? Then, Mrs. Halverson spoke, her voice brittle and forced. Mr. Carter, if you choose to leave, we can't promise your position will still be available should you change your mind. The audacity of it almost made him laugh. They had fired him. Suspended him without pay. Humiliated him. And now, suddenly, they were pretending it was his choice? Before he could respond, another voice spoke up, Mrs. Castillo, Jamie's mother. You know what? She stepped forward, her hands on her hips. I don't care if Mr. Carter stays here or takes the job with Mr. Sinclair. But I know one thing, if this school is going to punish teachers for helping our kids, then maybe we should be looking for another school altogether. A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. She's right, Mr. Thompson added. My daughter told me she doesn't want to come to school anymore because they took away the one teacher who actually cares. Is that what this school stands for now? Pushing out the people who make a difference? Mrs. Halverson looked stricken. That's not fair. We have rules for a reason, Bull, Mrs. Castillo shot back. This isn't about rules. It's about power. And you all are mad because Mr. Carter had the nerve to step up and do the right thing when you wouldn't. More parents chimed in, their voices rising in anger, demanding answers, demanding change. And then, the unexpected happened. Jamie stepped forward, tugging at his mother's sleeve, and she crouched down so he could whisper something in her ear. A moment later, she stood up, her expression unreadable, and turned back to the crowd. My son has something to say. The hallway fell into a hush. Jamie took a deep breath, then looked straight at Mr. Carter. I didn't want to come to school anymore, 'cause it's too hard when you don't got what you need. But when you got me those shoes, I wasn't just happy. I felt like I belonged. Like I mattered. A lump formed in Mr. Carter's throat. Jamie turned to Mrs. Halverson, his little hands clenched at his sides. You told my mom that rules are rules. But what about the rule that says teachers are supposed to care about their students? The air in the hallway crackled with emotion. Mrs. Halverson opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, she had nothing to say. Mr. Carter swallowed hard, glancing around at the faces before him. This wasn't just about his job anymore. It was about what kind of place this school would be. What kind of people these kids would grow up to become. He took a deep breath, turning back to Ethan Sinclair. I appreciate your offer. More than I can say. But if there's a fight to be had here, if there's a chance to change things for these kids, I don't think I can walk away from that. A slow smile spread across Sinclair's face. I was hoping you'd say that. Then, he turned back to Mrs. Halverson, his expression unreadable. So, what's it going to be? Are you going to let a great teacher do his job, or should I start looking into funding a brand new school for all these parents who are clearly ready to walk out? The color drained from Mrs. Halverson's face. $10 million. A potential exodus of students and funding. She had no choice. She forced a tight-lipped smile. Perhaps we acted too quickly. We'd be open to reinstating Mr. Carter, of course. A roar of applause erupted from the parents and students. Jamie ran forward, wrapping his arms around Mr. Carter's waist. You're still my teacher, he whispered. Tears pricked at Mr. Carter's eyes. Yeah, buddy. I am. And just like that, everything changed. Riverside Elementary would never be the same. But neither would he. The uproar in the hallway didn't die down for several minutes. Parents were still discussing the situation in urgent whispers, teachers exchanging glances as if trying to process what had just happened. The students, many too young to fully understand the weight of the moment, simply felt the shift in energy. Something big had happened, something important. Mr. Carter knelt beside Jamie, the little boy still clinging to him like he was afraid it had all been a dream. It's okay, Jamie, he murmured. I'm not going anywhere. Jamie pulled back, his eyes shining with relief. Promise? Mr. Carter hesitated only for a second before nodding. Promise. But even as he said the words, he knew this was far from over. Ethan Sinclair had given the school board an ultimatum, but that didn't mean Mrs. Halverson or the district administration would suddenly start supporting him. If anything, they would be watching him even closer now, waiting for him to slip up. And there was another problem, a bigger problem. The kids still didn't have what they needed. Sure, a handful of students had new shoes now, but what about next time? What about the others who came to school without proper coats? The ones who didn't have school supplies? The ones who missed breakfast? Mr. Carter wasn't willing to just go back to the way things were. And neither, it seemed, were the parents. As the crowd began to disperse, Mrs. Castillo touched his arm. We're not letting this slide, she said firmly. A lot of us have been talking. It's not just you getting punished for doing the right thing, it's all of us being ignored. We've been struggling for years, hoping the school would do more for these kids, and we're done waiting. She wasn't the only one who felt that way. That night, a small group of parents and teachers gathered at a local diner, sitting around a corner booth usually reserved for large families. The rebellion had begun. First things first, said Mrs. Castillo, stirring sugar into her coffee with more force than necessary. We need to make sure this never happens again. One of the other teachers, Mr. Patel, nodded. If we want real change, we can't just react when something bad happens, we have to be ahead of the problem. Mr. Carter sat back, listening to them talk, an idea forming in his mind. We need a system, he said slowly. Something organized. If the school won't help these kids, we will. Everyone leaned in. What do you mean? He took a deep breath. A community fund. Something that isn't tied to the school but exists to make sure every student has what they need. Shoes, jackets, supplies, whatever it takes. And we do it quietly, efficiently. No red tape, no waiting on approvals. The parents loved the idea. Over the next 2 hours, they planned. They would start by reaching out to local businesses, churches, community centers, anyone who might be willing to donate. They would create a network of volunteers to identify students in need and get them help discreetly. It wasn't just about shoes anymore. It was about making sure no child ever felt forgotten again. But then, the first problem arose. The next morning, Mr. Carter arrived at school to find an email from the district office. Subject: Strict policy reminder. Teacher conduct. The message was polite but clear. Teachers may not provide financial assistance or material goods to students. Teachers must report students in need to the proper channels instead. Any further violations would result in termination. Mr. Carter clenched his fists. They were doubling down. And that wasn't all. During lunch, Ms. Reynolds pulled him aside, lowering her voice. Daniel, they called me in this morning. They wanted to know if I'd heard anything about you organizing something with the parents. He frowned. Are they serious? They're spying on me now? They're not going to just let this go, she whispered. If you push too hard, they'll find a reason to get rid of you. And this time, not even Sinclair will be able to stop them. She wasn't wrong. But he wasn't backing down either. And then, the second problem arose. A few days later, Mr. Carter was grading papers when Jamie appeared at his desk, shifting from foot to foot. Something wrong, buddy? Jamie hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as if worried someone might overhear. My mom said the school is trying to take back the shoes. Mr. Carter froze. What? Jamie bit his lip. Some lady from the office came to our house and said I might have to give them back, 'cause it wasn't fair to the other kids. Rage surged through him. They weren't really doing this. He stormed down the hallway, straight into the office, and confronted Mrs. Halverson. What the hell is going on? She didn't even blink at his anger. Mr. Carter, I'm not sure what you're referring to. Jamie. His mother said someone came by their house to take the shoes back. Mrs. Halverson sighed, giving him a patronizing look. There were concerns about fairness. We can't allow some students to receive special treatment while others, special treatment? His voice was dangerously low. You mean having basic human necessities? She folded her hands on her desk. This isn't up for discussion. The school district has made its decision. Mr. Carter saw red. They weren't just stopping him from helping, they were actively hurting these kids out of spite. That night, everything changed. With no other options, Mr. Carter called Sinclair. The billionaire answered on the second ring. Carter. What's going on? Mr. Carter told him everything. By the time he finished, Sinclair was silent for a long moment. Then, his voice came through the line, calm but filled with something cold and sharp. "I gave them a chance," he said. "I told them to fix this. They didn't." The next morning, everything blew up. Sinclair released a public statement, exposing everything: how Mr. Carter had been punished, how the school had threatened parents, how they had tried to take the shoes back. The story went national. Within hours, the district was flooded with outraged calls and emails. Parents from all over the country demanded answers. And then, the final blow. Sinclair announced that he was personally funding a new educational initiative in Willowbrook. A fully equipped community center where children could get supplies, tutoring, and meals without the school's interference. The school board panicked. They begged Sinclair to reconsider, to work with them instead of around them. But Sinclair's response was brutal. "You had your chance. Now you get to watch someone else do your job for you." It was over. Within a week, Mrs. Halverson resigned under public pressure. Within a month, the district officially reversed its policies. And within a year, Mr. Carter stood in front of the brand new community center, surrounded by parents, teachers, and students. Jamie stood beside him, smiling up at him, wearing a brand new pair of shoes. And for the first time in a long time, Mr. Carter knew he had won. The grand opening of the Willowbrook Community Learning Center was unlike anything the town had ever seen. The streets were packed with families, local business owners, and even reporters who had traveled miles to cover the story that had ignited a national conversation about education, poverty, and the power of community-driven change. The new center stood as a symbol of defiance, proof that when people stood together, they could accomplish what institutions had failed to do for years. Mr. Carter stood at the front doors, his heart swelling as he took it all in. The once abandoned warehouse had been transformed into a state-of-the-art facility, complete with a fully stocked supply room, tutoring spaces, a computer lab, a food pantry, and even a small clothing boutique where kids could get warm coats and proper shoes without shame. Every inch of the center had been designed with one goal in mind: to give students what the school system refused to. Ethan Sinclair, standing beside him, adjusted the cuffs of his suit. "Not bad, huh?" he mused, his signature smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "Not bad at all," Mr. Carter admitted, still in awe of what they had pulled off in just a few short months. "I can't believe this is actually happening." "Oh, it's happening," Sinclair said. "And this is just the beginning." As if on cue, a cheer erupted from the crowd as the ribbon was officially cut. Parents streamed in with their children, eyes wide with disbelief as they took in the shelves lined with notebooks, pencils, backpacks, and winter gear, all free of charge. Nearby, Jamie tugged at his mother's sleeve, staring up at the center with pure amazement. "Mama," he whispered, "does this mean other kids don't have to be cold anymore?" Mrs. Castillo's eyes shone with emotion as she ruffled her son's hair. "That's exactly what it means, baby." But as the celebration continued, not everyone was pleased. Across the street, a small group of school district officials stood together, watching with thinly veiled disapproval. Among them was Mr. Dobson, the same administrator who had signed off on Mr. Carter's original suspension. His face was unreadable, but his clenched jaw and furrowed brow made one thing clear: they weren't happy about losing control. Later that evening, as the crowds began to thin and the celebration turned into quiet conversations among parents and volunteers, Sinclair pulled Mr. Carter aside. "You do realize they're going to come after you, right?" Mr. Carter sighed, rubbing his temples. "Yeah. I know. They lost, Carter. And people like that?" Sinclair shook his head. "They don't take losing well." He wasn't wrong. The fight wasn't over. Just a week after the center opened, the retaliation began. First, it was small. Whispers among school officials. Rumors spread to discredit Mr. Carter. The school board quietly suggested to parents that the community center was encouraging dependence instead of letting kids learn how to work for what they needed. Then, it escalated. Anonymous complaints were filed, questioning whether the center was even legal. Health inspectors suddenly showed up unannounced, nitpicking over the tiniest details, expired food labels, fire extinguisher placements. And then, the worst blow of all came. One morning, Mr. Carter arrived at the center to find a notice taped to the front door. Closed until further notice, pending investigation by the city council. His stomach dropped. Parents were already arriving with their kids, looking at the notice in confusion and growing frustration. "What's going on?" Mrs. Castillo demanded. "Who shut you down?" Mr. Carter read the fine print. The city council had received complaints about zoning violations, claiming the community center wasn't properly licensed to operate as an educational facility. His fists clenched. This was a blatant attack. A bureaucratic loophole being used to stall them, to try and kill momentum. Sinclair was on the phone within minutes, calling his lawyers, calling anyone who could help. But even he looked frustrated. "They're burying us in red tape," he muttered. "They want to drown us in paperwork, delay this for months, long enough for people to lose hope." That's when Mr. Carter made a decision. They weren't playing defense anymore. For weeks, the school board had been using their power to try and stop him. But they had made one mistake: they underestimated how far he was willing to go. If they wanted a fight, he would bring it to them. That night, he gathered everyone. The parents, the volunteers, the students. He told them the truth. That the city wasn't shutting them down for any real reason, that this was a political move to protect the school district's reputation. And people were angry. A movement had started. The next morning, hundreds of parents marched to City Hall, carrying signs, chanting in protest. "Let the kids learn. Education belongs to everyone. Stop punishing our children." The media swarmed. News stations picked up the story. And just like that, the city council's quiet attempt to shut them down quietly had turned into a national controversy. The mayor, who had been conveniently silent until now, suddenly appeared in front of cameras, promising to look into the matter and speed up the investigation. Sinclair smirked when he saw the live coverage. That's more like it. The last stand over the next 2 weeks, the pressure didn't let up. Parents refused to send their kids to school, keeping them home in protest. Businesses pulled funding from the district, shifting their donations to the community center instead. The school board was backed into a corner. And finally, they cracked. The city council held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to reinstate the center's permit, allowing it to reopen immediately. But the damage was already done. Mrs. Halverson was gone. Mr. Dobson, the school district administrator who had originally backed Mr. Carter's suspension, forced to resign. And as for the school board? The next election saw a total sweep of new members, people who actually cared. A new beginning 1 month later, the community center was running better than ever. Donations poured in from across the country. People who had followed the story wanted to be part of something bigger. And standing in the middle of it all, Mr. Carter finally felt at peace. He had almost lost everything. But instead, he had built something indestructible. And as Jamie ran up to him, grinning, his brand new backpack slung over his shoulder, Mr. Carter knew. This was only the beginning. The morning sun spilled golden light over the Willowbrook Community Learning Center, illuminating the building that had once been a simple dream, a desperate attempt to stand against the injustice of a broken system. Now, it was so much more. Mr. Carter stood outside, watching as students streamed in, their laughter ringing in the crisp autumn air. Backpacks were filled with supplies. Coats were thick and warm. No child would ever have to come here barefoot again. It still felt surreal. Months ago, he had been suspended for doing what he believed was right. Now, he was at the helm of something far greater than a classroom. He was leading a revolution in education. Ethan Sinclair pulled up in his sleek black car, stepping out with his usual air of confidence. "Not bad, Carter," he said, surveying the scene. "Not bad at all." Mr. Carter chuckled. "High praise coming from a billionaire." Sinclair smirked. "I don't throw around compliments easily." They walked inside together, greeted by volunteers bustling about, checking inventory, preparing tutoring schedules, and managing a new mentorship program for high school students. What had started as a small effort to provide shoes had transformed into something unstoppable. But even as they celebrated their victories, new challenges loomed. A growing threat: the school district, still reeling from their very public humiliation, had not forgotten or forgiven. In recent weeks, there had been whispers of new policies being introduced, ones that would make it harder for students who relied on the community center to stay in school. Sinclair had warned him. "They're not done coming after you." And he had been right. Mr. Carter found himself summoned to a town council meeting, where several board members and district officials sat in stiff silence. "We appreciate the work you've done," the mayor began, choosing his words carefully. "However, we have concerns about the long-term sustainability of the community center." Mr. Carter folded his arms. "Define concerns." Another official, a man with sharp eyes and a permanent scowl, cleared his throat. "You're creating dependency, Carter. You're making it so these families expect handouts instead of learning to fend for themselves." Anger flared white-hot in his chest. "So, what's your solution? Let a 10-year-old walk to school in the snow with holes in his shoes? Let kids go hungry in the name of self-reliance?" The room was silent. Then, a third official, a woman with calculating eyes, leaned forward. "We're considering new attendance policies. If students miss too many days, especially due to non-school affiliated activities, they could be held back or expelled." Mr. Carter's stomach turned. This wasn't about attendance. This was about scaring families away from relying on the center. Sinclair, who had been silent up until now, let out a low chuckle. "You're serious? You're threatening to punish children for getting help?" The mayor shifted uncomfortably. "We're simply trying to establish boundaries." Sinclair stood up, adjusting his jacket. "All right. Then let me make something crystal clear." He placed a folder on the table, sliding it toward them. "That," he said, "is a fully detailed proposal for an independent charter school, completely funded by me." The officials went pale. "You try to pull this garbage?" Sinclair continued, his voice sharp. "You try to force these kids out? I'll build a better school and take them all with me. And guess what? Every good teacher in this district will come with us. You'll have empty classrooms and no funding." Silence suffocated the room. The school board had already been crippled by the backlash of firing Mr. Carter. If Sinclair made good on his threat, it would destroy them. The woman with the calculating eyes cleared her throat. "Let's not be hasty. Perhaps we can revisit these policies." Mr. Carter met her gaze, unflinching. "You do that." The final piece falls into place after the meeting. Sinclair exhaled as they stepped outside. "You sure you don't want to run this new school? You'd make one hell of a principal." Mr. Carter shook his head with a small smile. "I started this fight for these kids. I'm going to finish it. Here." Sinclair studied him, then nodded. "All right. But if they come for you again?" Mr. Carter grinned. "They won't win." Because now, he wasn't just a teacher. He was part of a movement that couldn't be stopped. And that, he knew, was only the beginning.